Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Muslims are performing the annual Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. In his sermon at Mount Arafat, Sheikh Abdullah bin Sulaiman al-Hmaniya urged Muslims to adhere to Islamic principles which encourage peace and harmony. He said the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the best source of guidance for the mankind. This year, a limited number of pilgrims have been allowed to participate amid restrictions to curb the potential spread of COVID-19. Pakistan says India faced failure by trying to take the case of spy Kulbhushan Yadav to the International Court of Justice again. Speaking in Parliament, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan provided consular access to Indian Raw-serving terrorist commander Yadav twice in line with ICJ recommendations. He added that Islamabad has failed India's endeavours to push Pakistan into the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force. Meanwhile, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi called on the world community to dissuade India from its disproportionate arms buildup. She was referring to India's purchase of Rafale war planes. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Muslims are performing the annual Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. In his sermon at Mount Arafat, Sheikh Abdullah bin Sulaiman al-Hmaniya urged Muslims to adhere to Islamic principles which encourage peace and harmony. This year, a limited number of pilgrims have been allowed to participate amid restrictions to curb the potential spread of COVID-19. More details in this report.
Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam which is mandatory for affluent Muslims to perform at least once in their lifetimes. The pilgrimage commemorates the sacrifices of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and his family. It is performed in 7 steps, starting from the 8th day of the lunar month of Zul-Hajj. Some of these rituals are performed across the world by Muslims on the eve of Eid al-Adha. Muslims from abroad are not attending the pilgrimage to curb the possible spread of COVID-19 and ensure social distancing. While last year nearly 2.5 million pilgrims from all over the globe performed Hajj. Saudi Arabian officials say all measures have been taken to prevent the spread of coronavirus during the pilgrimage.
Now, the global cases of COVID-19 have crossed 17 million with more than 667,000 deaths. Brazil has reported a record increase in the daily number of COVID-19 cases as well as the deaths. The country logged over 69,000 infections in the past 24 hours. 1,599 people died overnight, with the toll crossing 90,000. More about this in this report.
The new coronavirus is wreaking havoc in the Americas, with over 150,000 being infected and thousands dying every day. The pandemic is raging in Brazil, where Mexico and Peru are struggling to contain the outbreak. In the US, more than 61,000 tested positive, while over 1,267 died in the last 24 hours, raising the death toll to over 150,000. The aggressive spread of the virus has been called into question President Donald Trump's push to open the country's economy.
As we have emphasized throughout the pandemic, the path forward for the economy is extraordinarily uncertain and will depend in large part on our success in keeping the virus in check. Indeed, we have seen some signs in recent weeks that the increase in virus cases and the renewed measures to control it are starting to weigh on economic activity.
Europe's fear of Spain's consistent increase in new cases has stalled plans of lifting travel restrictions. Despite repeated appeals by the Spanish government not to cut the country off, the UK urges caution is necessary.
But it's absolutely essential we acted when we did. It's why all 4 nations of the United Kingdom acted together, and the figures since have turned out to justify that action. So we have to, I think, have a clear message and make sure that we act by adding entire countries to that list for the time being.
In Asia, spread in mainland China continues to inch up, with Beijing reported 105 new cases, the country's highest in months. But the outbreak in South Korea appears to have slowed as new cases dropped to 18, the lowest in a month. Meanwhile, Australia has reported the highest number of cases since the coronavirus pandemic began. The worst hit state of Victoria reported 723 infections and 13 deaths overnight.
Well, in Pakistan, over 90% of COVID-19 patients have recovered. The Health Ministry said the number of active cases has dropped to 25,347. The ministry said 32 more people have died, increasing the tally to nearly 6,000. It said over 1,100 tested positive in the last 24 hours, taking the count to over 277,000. The ministry said 1,179 patients of COVID-19 are in a critical condition. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 120,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 93,000 cases. Moving on now, a record high of 52,152 people have tested positive for COVID-19 in India over the past 24 hours. 775 people died overnight in the country as the government mulls easing its 130-day-long lockdown to revive an ailing economy. New Delhi's health ministry says the death toll in the country is nearing 35,000, while over 1.5 million people have been affected by the virus. The Indian government announced Unlock 3.0, its third phase of easing restrictions, under which gyms, nightclubs and yoga centres are set to reopen. India's government has been desperately pushing to lift restrictions as the economy was already jittery when the pandemic struck the country hard. Now, Pakistan says India faced failure by trying to take the case of spy Kulbhushan Yadav to the International Court of Justice again. Speaking in Parliament, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan provided consular access to Indian RAWs serving terrorist commander Yadav twice, in line with ICJ recommendations. He said India made false claims of not getting free access to its agent commander Yadav. Qureshi said Delhi has also been trying hard to push Pakistan into the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force, but Islamabad has taken all steps to avert the move. Meanwhile, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Faruqi called on the world community to dissuade India from its disproportionate arms buildup. She was commenting on Delhi's procurement of Rafale warplanes in a briefing in Islamabad. Faruqi said such arms transfers call into question the commitment of international supplies to nuclear non-proliferation. Talking about the 3-day Eid ceasefire in Afghanistan, Faruqi said it is a positive step towards sustainable peace in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the US Special Representative Zalmay Khalilzad has arrived in Kabul to push for intra-Afghan negotiations. The US envoy held meetings with President Ashraf Ghani and head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah. In a statement, Presidential Palace said the leaders discussed the completion of prisoner swap and reduction in violence, which are prerequisite to the talks. Earlier, Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the group will be releasing all remaining Afghan prisoners. Shaheen asked Kabul to fulfill its end of the peace pact and free the remaining 5,000 Taliban detainees. Moving on, Turkey says it has killed 6 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria and Iraq. The Defense Ministry says the army killed 3 fighters in Syria's Operation Peace Spring. The ministry said 3 others were killed in Iraq's Awasin-Basiyan region. It said Turkey will continue to destroy terrorist weapons caches and shelters. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. The United Arab Emirates says it supports Egypt's efforts to resolve the crisis in Libya. In a phone call, UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan and his Egyptian counterpart Sami Shalkhri discussed regional issues. The Foreign Ministry said the leaders discussed ways of supporting the ongoing efforts to promote a political settlement to the crisis. It said Sheikh Abdullah also emphasized the historical and strategic relations binding the two countries. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the government of national accord and the Libyan National Army. Abu Dhabi and Cairo support LNA's commander Khalifa Haftar against the UN-recognized government. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has ratified a law to restrict retired army officers from running in elections without due permission from the military. Sisi himself is a former army chief who seized power from the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, in a coup. An official gazette notice said both active and retired officers are not allowed to run for the presidential, parliamentary or local elections. The law permits the army to offer an opinion on constitutional amendments and bills related to political rights, elections and national security. The legislation also directs the defense minister to appoint a military advisor for each of Egypt's 27 provinces. Now, unidentified attackers have killed 14 villagers and wounded another 6 in Nigeria's central Kogi state. The police has termed the incident as communal violence. In a statement, police said assailants on motorcycles randomly opened fire on locals in the Agbudu village. It said 13 of the dead have been identified as members of the same family. Police said an investigation has been launched into the incident, adding that a long-standing row over land rights was a possible motive. Now over to Mali, where the opposition has threatened a second wave of civil disobedience if President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta does not resign. Opposition leader Choguel Maïga said the second phase will start 3 days after the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha. The first movement was suspended after regional leaders stepped in to solve the crisis, but they have failed to mediate a truce as the political deadlock between the government and opposition continues. The demand for Keïta's resignation started in June over a crumbling economy and alleged corruption. President Keïta has been in office since 2013. Now, the UN and the OIC has welcomed the implementation of the RIYADH agreement signed by Yemen's government and the Southern Transitional Council. The mechanism covers maintenance of ceasefire and de-escalation between the legitimate government and the southern rebels. UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, called the move an important step towards the peaceful resolution of the conflict in Yemen. In a statement, Secretary General of OIC, Youssef Al-Othaymin, reiterated the implementation of deal reflects the success of Kingdom's political efforts. He said the Kingdom adopted a balanced approach in dealing with both parties. Earlier, Yemen's government and the Southern Transition Council agreed to return to a stalled peace deal brokered by Saudi Arabia. Moving on, Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi has instructed security forces to refrain from use of violence on demonstrators. This comes after 3 people were killed during demonstrations against the power cuts in Baghdad and Najaf this week. In a statement, Kadhimi's media office said the Prime Minister also asked officials to meet the legitimate demands of protesters. It said Kadhimi held meetings with top security officials of the country, including head of the National Security Agency. The office said they discussed security issues and ways to tackle criminal gangs kidnapping and killing protesters. It's time for a short break. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Britain has named career diplomat and intelligence officer Richard Moore as the new chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. In a statement, the British government confirmed that Moore will succeed Sir Alex Younger in autumn. Moore was born in Libya and studied philosophy, politics and economics at Oxford University. He was also a Kennedy Scholar at Harvard University. Moore has been serving as Director General of Political Affairs at the Foreign Office since 2018. He also served as the British Ambassador to Turkey from January 2014 to December 2017. In a landmark decision after 75 years, Japan's Hiroshima District Court has recognized survivors of the atomic bombing's black rain, which now makes them eligible for free medical treatment. The court said 84 plaintiffs who are suffering from illness linked to radiation exposure are entitled to local government's free medical treatment. The survivors are now in their late 70s to 90s. The landmark ruling comes a week before Hiroshima marks the 75th anniversary of the August 6th attack, which reduced the city to rubble and killed an estimated 140,000 people. Now in Japan, one person has been killed while 17 are injured in a suspected gas leak explosion at the Oniyashi restaurant in the Fukushima prefecture. Country's fire department said the injured were taken to the hospitals as 2 victims remain in serious condition. Authorities said there was no sign of a fire at the site of the recently renovated restaurant that was due to reopen on Friday. They said the blast blew out walls and windows of the building. The local government has closed off and evacuated the area. In a statement, the company apologized to the victims and said it's working with authorities to determine the cause of the incident. Bangladesh says around 37% of the country has been flooded after recent spells of torrential monsoon rains. The country's National Disaster Response Coordination Center says over 5 million people in 31 districts have been affected by the floods. It said people of the low-lying areas have been worst affected. The center said over 900 kilometers of roads have been washed away by the floods. It said 119 people have died from the torrential rains this year. Now, the U.S. has threatened Brazil of consequences if it allows China's Huawei technologies into its 5G network. In an interview, U.S. Ambassador to Brazil, Todd Chapman, said Brazil can't suffer a drop in foreign investment if it persists with Huawei. Chapman said firms hesitate to invest in countries where intellectual property is not protected. The U.S. envoy said Washington is willing to assist its allies who choose to buy telecoms infrastructure from trustworthy suppliers. President Donald Trump has created the U.S. International Development Finance Corp to counter China's global influence with a $60 billion fund. Earlier last month, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro said the 5G deployment will have to meet national sovereignty and data security requirements. Chinese drug company Sinopharm and Brazil's Paraná state have agreed to launch the 4th major COVID-19 vaccine trials in Brazil. Brazil's authorities say regulatory approval will be sought in the next 2 weeks. Head of Brazil's Paraná Tech Institute, Jorge Calado, said they will soon finalize their proposal. Brazil's COVID-19 outbreak, the world's worst outside the U.S., has made it a global testing ground for potential vaccines. Sinopharm's candidate vaccine is already being tested in the UAE with 15,000 volunteers. Now, the European Commission has signed a contract with the makers of COVID-19 life-saving drug Remdesivir to secure treatment doses for the region. The bloc said the deal with Gilead will ensure the treatment of approximately 30,000 patients presenting severe COVID-19 symptoms. The EU Commission spokeswoman Dana Spinen said the Commission has agreed to pay $74 million to purchase this life-saving drug. On July the 3rd, Remdesivir became the first treatment to be authorized for a conditional marketing. The medicine has been declared first known treatment for COVID-19. Moving on, the European Union has sent 41 tons of humanitarian aid to South Sudan through 45 air bridge flights. The EU Commission said it has financed the delivery of 1,100 tons of medical equipment to critical areas in Africa, Asia and the Americas this year. It said the air bridge flights transported 1,475 medical and humanitarian staff since its launch on May 8, 2020. Commissioner for the Crisis Management, Janes, says the bloc will continue to coordinate at international level during the pandemic. He also said the EU is closely coordinating with the UN flight operations managed by the World Food Programme. The origin of the giant Sarsen stones at UK's Stonehenge has finally been discovered with the help of a missing piece of the site, which was returned after 60 years. This comes after the archaeologists from the English HAJJ carried out the research and test. The monument's smaller blue stones have been traced to the Preseli Hills in Wales, but the Sarsens had been impossible to identify until now. Archaeologists pinpointed the source of the stones to an area of 25 kilometers north of the site near Marlborough. A test of the meter-long core stolen and moved to the US during 1958 excavation was matched with a geochemical study of the standing megaliths. Scientists say the location of the origin will help identify the route and means of transportation of the massive stone pillars. NASA's Perseverance rover has launched from Florida, United States. The rover will hunt for evidence of ancient life on the surface of Mars. The car-sized rover carries a suite of science instruments designed to detect traces of fossil life if it's there. It will spend 7 months traveling to Mars before landing in J0 crater near the planet's equator. This is the third. The UAE and China have also launched Mars missions in recent weeks, taking advantage of the planet's close approach to Earth. In Bosnia, divers plunge into history as they jump from Old Bridge in the city of Mostar. The annual contest, which is thought to date back to the 15th century, is a big tourist attraction. More details this Daredevil competition in this report.
Originally built by the Ottomans more than 450 years ago, the Mostar Bridge was destroyed by Bosnian Croat forces during the 90s war. It was later rebuilt in a complicated effort and opened again in 2004. The bridge is a symbol of reconciliation. The plunge from the bridge is also a traditional rite of passage for local youths. The organizer says COVID-19 did not reduce the number of competitors.
Coronavirus did not reduce the number of jumpers and the audience too much because people are really craving any kind of sports events. And we all know how football and everything else affected Bosnia and Herzegovina. These guys are brave and they are jumping off the bridge, so they are not afraid of the COVID-19.
Diving in either head first or feet first, people compete to jump into the cold water of the Neretva River from a 24-meter high bridge.
During the coronavirus, we were responsible. My coach and I were in isolation. We were training far in the woods. We were preparing for these 2 jumps because I was the only jumper from Mostar and we managed to keep the title in the city.
Under measures to limit the spread of COVID-19, only 100 people were allowed to watch the contest. A few hundred more spectators watched from further away, observing social distancing guidelines.
Television's biggest awards, the 72nd Emmys, will be held virtually this year due to COVID-19 pandemic. Executive producers have written to Emmy nominees that there will not be a traditional gathering in Los Angeles. The producers say they are mulling over the details, including what elements will be live or if winners will be informed beforehand. Earlier, the nominations for the 2020 awards were announced, which Netflix dominated with a record 160 nominations. It was followed by HBO with 107 nominations, including a surprise nod for Zendaya, the 23-year-old star of the teen drama Euphoria. The envelopes are scheduled to be unsealed on September 20th during a ceremony broadcasted by ABC and hosted by Jimmy Kimmel. European markets have pulled back as investors react cautiously to reports of major corporate earnings. The pan-European stock 600 has slipped, with banks and autos both shedding almost 2% to lead the losses. London's FTSE slumped over 1%, while Frankfurt's DAX dipped close to 2%. Paris's CAC 40 lost over 0.5%. Earlier, most stocks in Asia Pacific edged up after the US Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged. Hong Kong's Hang Seng, Australia's ASX 200 and Seoul's Kospi made modest gains, but Japanese stocks edged down, while mainland Chinese bourses traded mixed. Newly crowned Italian champions Juventus have suffered a shock 2-0 defeat at the hands of 13th place Cagliari at the Sardinia Arena. Both Luca and Giovanni scored in the first half of the host as they valiantly denied an old lady onslaught to keep a clean sheet. Cagliari's clean sheet meant star striker Cristiano Ronaldo's hopes of finishing the season as top scorer also faded away. The Portuguese attacker is on 31 goals for this full season, 4 behind Lazio's Ciro Immobile with only 1 league game left to play. Earlier, Lazio beat relegated Brescia by 2-0 as Immobile hit his 35th goal of the season, 1 short of Gonzalo's record of 36 goals. Elsewhere, AC Milan won 4-1 at Sampdoria. Lecce came back to beat Udinese 2-1, while Sassuolo thumped Genoa 5-0 at home. Now, let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.